Hi everyone, you're listening to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob B, joined by Rob D, and this week we're talking Brexit.
There'll be some who will tell you Brexit is a disaster for this country, and some will tell you that Brexit will create a land of milk and honey.
We have a shared interest in getting this right.
I would say that, Brexit is Brexit.
It's welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about the nation's new favourite way to fall out with your friends and family. It always used to be house prices that were the topic of dinner party conversation, but for the last couple of years it's been Brexit. What happens though if you put the two of those together? Wow, then what a conversation you could have. What effect has Brexit had on the property market so far? And most importantly, what's going to happen next, depending on whether we have a deal, some other deal, no deal at all, or another referendum so we can prolong the whole thing even further. That's what we're talking about in today's episode, and stick around for Hub Extra where we've got a fantastic quote that puts all this into perspective.
So this week, Rob, and with many weeks actually, our news story relates to our main topic, which is Brexit. But we've selected a few news stories this week, really to highlight what we're going to get into in a few moments' time. Now, the big headline, which has caught the attention of many of our listeners, is the house prices to fall by 35%, which was predicted by Mark Carney. Or was it? And this is the key, Rob. There's so many big headlines out there, but once again, when you dig down into the info, it's all a bit confusing.
Yeah, this made me quite angry this week, and it takes a bit to make me angry, but it's because once again the headlines that were chosen for this bore very little resemblance to what actually happened, and as a result it scared a lot of people. The headline in the BBC was Brexit, Carney warns no deal could see house prices plunge, and The Guardian says no deal Brexit could be as bad as the 2008 financial crash, Carney says. And this all comes from leaked reports of something that he told a cabinet meeting where he allegedly predicted that house prices would fall by 35% in just 3 years, and lots of other terrible things would happen in the event of a no-deal Brexit. There's only one catch with these headlines. He did not predict that at all. Where those figures actually come from is a stress test that the Bank of England has been running since last year. The Bank of England regularly runs stress tests to see what would happen to the economy if various things happen. And one of the things that they've had running since last year is what would happen if house prices fell by this much, interest rates went up by that much, employment did this, and so on and so on. So all the reports coming out of this cabinet meeting are just him talking about a stress test that they're running anyway. A stress test is not a prediction. In business and in economics, you're always running experiments to see what might happen if various things came about, just as a way of seeing where you're vulnerable, where you might be able to strengthen things, and so on. That is absolutely not the same thing as saying this will happen if that happens. But in the reporting, strangely enough, that was lost because it doesn't make for such an exciting headline. And I just think it's really irresponsible because, yeah, a lot of things might happen. Maybe there's even a high probability of bad things happening. But scaring people by reporting something inaccurately, and I know it's scared people because I've had emails about it this week, just seems wildly irresponsible to me.
It is, but the press love their wild headlines, and understandably so, because they want to sell newspapers. So you can park that news story, but you'd still be forgiven for being nervous currently with the property market or just the economy in general, with all the news stories that are circulating right now. And it's mixed messages. That's the confusing part. It's all the uncertainty. It's all the mixed messages that are being put out there. To give you a flavour, we've picked up a few news stories out recently. So another news story we've picked up is an article in The Times, which looks at the luxury housing market and how it appears that it's recovering, even though of all the market areas, that's the one that's been hit the hardest. So contrast the news to what we're normally seeing. Then data from Nationwide was released in August, which showed property prices were falling. Of course, that created a lot of headlines. But Rob, in the same month, what did we have from Halifax with their data?
Well, yeah, if you don't like the news that house prices are falling, you can look at the story that says house prices are rising. Halifax, with their data for exactly the same month, has showed that house prices rose by 3.7% in August. So you can either choose to be optimistic about prices or negative about them, depending on which data source you look at. Or you can cut it straight down the middle and look at the RICS data instead, which is saying that prices aren't rising or falling. They're staying the same because prices are going down in London and the South East and up elsewhere, which end up cancelling each other out. So basically, it's like a choose your own adventure thing. You can decide what you want the reality to be and then pick your news story to match.
So pretty confusing, right? And that's why we've got a podcast on this subject, because a lot of this is due to Brexit. Well, not Brexit itself, the uncertainty of what's going to happen with Brexit. And the problem is that you and every other man, woman and dog on the street don't really know what's going to happen next. Well, we don't pretend to have a crystal ball, but actually we feel that it's fairly predictable of what's going to play out. When you take away the short-term drama, the long-term trends will always prevail. And this week, by the end of this podcast, we're going to hope that you feel a little less uncertain about Brexit.
Yeah, and our apologies if you're thoroughly sick of the whole subject. And you'd be forgiven for being sick of the whole thing by this point. But we know that a lot of people do want to know what this means for property. Does this mean that now is a great buying opportunity? Does it mean that it's time to sit out of the market until things die down? Does this mean that the whole 18-year property cycle is out the window because you've got this big once-in-a-generation event that could throw the whole thing off? That's what everyone's wondering at the moment. We've got some thoughts about that. We don't have a crystal ball, but we do have some ideas based on history and based on some fundamental principles. So we'll come to that. But first, Rob, I think it's worth casting our minds back to how the world was before this all started. Yeah, believe it or not, it might be hard to remember, but there was a time before the B word got mentioned about 1 billion times a day. So let's go back and remind ourselves how the market was looking before the referendum.
Yes, I feel really sorry for our previous friend, the credit crunch, because Brexit's taken all the limelight. Poor credit crunch, no one talks about it anymore. And that happened for a reason, because the cause of that was way back in 2008. We had our market crash afterwards, and London recovered first. So after the big crash in the property market and the economy in general, and most markets around the world, the recovery in the property market in the UK was led by London. Then eventually prices started to ripple out into the outskirts of London, surrounding areas, the southeast in general, other prime towns and cities. Then the north started to see their share. Manchester started to see growth. Birmingham too. And then in the 18-year property cycle, we were waiting for the mid-cycle wobble. Well, just in time, Brexit stepped up and helped deliver it.
Yes, if you haven't been following along with our episodes on the property cycle, in which case I thoroughly encourage you to go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast and type cycle into the search box and get yourself up to speed. The idea is that after any crash, you have a period of slow growth before things have a little bit of a wobble, stay still for a while, then prices really kick on again before things get wildly over-optimistic. Prices go crazy and the whole thing crashes again and the whole thing repeats. If you're following along in your calendar and marking off the years, you were due for a mid-cycle wobble round about now. So the referendum came at a time when you'd expect the market to be turning a little bit anyway. And the mid-cycle wobble is characterised by uncertainty, and wow, have we had a lot of that. The market and the media in particular has looked very different over the last 2 years. Back in 2015, people were worried about prices rising and getting out of control again and people being priced out. And there are still concerns about affordability, especially in London. But most of the headlines have been worrying about a crash rather than a boom. There's been a lot of negative media coverage around house prices. A lot of that caused by the fact that in London, where if you've got a short memory, prices only ever go up, has actually stalled and prices have flatlined at best, and prime London has actually fallen. But as we saw from our news stories earlier, it's not a clear picture. The RICS survey that we mentioned reflects something that we've seen for the last couple of years. While London has been stalling, the north has been pushing ahead. You've still got house price growth in the north. So over the last 2 years, because there's been this mixed picture in terms of what's happening with prices, and there's been all the stuff in the papers about what's going on economically and politically, which no one really has a clue about, the key word is uncertainty. So that's us caught up. That's where we are now. That's what the last few years have been like. And I know that you've lived through it, but it's worth recapping and remembering how much has changed. So that's where we are now, and the history is all very interesting. But what people really want to know, Rob, is what's going to happen next?
So here's the beautiful thing about cycles and economics, is if actually you strip away all the emotion that surrounds Brexit, and there's a lot of emotion, if you take that away, it's actually very simplistic when you look at what's going to play out and what's going to happen. So you may be asking yourself questions like, oh, when will the accelerated growth phase of the property cycle happen? Which in the 18-year property cycle is the phase after the mid-cycle wobble. When will the market bottom out? Is there more to go? And for many of you, you'll be asking, is there a buying opportunity right now? So we're going to be a little bit brave here and give you our thoughts on what we feel will happen. But I say brave, but as I've already mentioned, I just feel this is cycles. This is not really about the vote. This is not really about what happens, no deal, Theresa May's deal, another referendum. These events are just very short term. And actually the cycle is all about the long term. So what's going to play out? Well, we're going to have our answer. We're going to have a Brexit or not, but we will have our answer. And when we have our answer, the market will probably be nervous afterwards for 6 to 12 months, depending on the outcome. It may be very strong afterwards if the market likes it, or if it really doesn't like it, it may take 6 to 12 months for things to recover. But that's it. All this negativity isn't going to affect prices afterwards because it's already priced into the market. The negativity is here now. So any further big falls and crashes are highly unlikely to take place. Now, as we've said, there may be a small dip, an extension of that wobble for another 6 or 12 months. But after that time's over, I believe that we'll go into that growth phase and we'll start to forget about Brexit like we have done with the credit crunch. Here's the big lesson I think you can take from this, and it took me a while to get my head around this because I felt emotional about the result. But actually, these events happen all the time. We had the credit crunch. I felt emotional then. Thought the financial world was going to end. You look back and you see, oh, actually, that was always going to happen. It was part of a cycle. Brexit, whether it was always going to happen or not, is debatable. But here's the thing. What happens next is relatively easy to predict. Of course, there's always variables, but when you strip emotion away from these subjects, you can see how these things play out. So the buying opportunity that I touched on is now. The negativity is priced in. Yes, the North is starting to go, but imagine what's going to happen when the Brexit brakes are taken off to that market. And London will start to recover again once Brexit's done. So there's a great opportunity now wherever you're hunting for deals. As long as you've got all the property fundamentals, of course. But that's another podcast.
That's it. What markets hate more than anything else is uncertainty. And there's been a whole lot of uncertainty around. And remember, it's not just the referendum. Something else that's been happening over the last couple of years is all the tax changes have been starting to kick in. So they were announced in the 2015 budget. And it's only in the years since then that people have been really getting their heads around it and figuring out what it means. And the first effects are starting to show up on tax returns now. That's something else where people have been trying to figure out what it means. It's causing some people to pull out of the market, others to sit back and figure out what's going on. No one knew what that was going to mean for property prices either. So there's a market-specific factor and there's a general economic and political factor as well. Both of those have caused this kind of weird period where in the residential market, at least, the only people who are buying and selling are the ones who really have to. But as Rob said, and I agree with this, it is priced in. Whatever happens next, I think people are just going to be relieved that it's finally happened. But if you are really negative about the whole thing and you think that there is some eventuality that could massively affect the housing market, then my question would be, well, what could that be? When you come back to the fundamentals again, the factors that influence house prices are largely three things. There's supply and demand, where there might be some small shift, but not much. There's sentiment, and like we've already said, I think the negative sentiment and the uncertainty is already there, so there's not going to be any more of that. And it's hard to think of any eventuality relating specifically to Brexit that's going to cause that to change. If you're really negative about the prospects for the economy, then if anything, interest rates would fall as far as they actually can, which would make credit cheaper and therefore support a high level of prices. So in a few short months, this will all be over. We'll find out what's happening and then things go back to normal. Or will it? All the talk at the moment is about the possibility of a second referendum. So, Rob, if that does end up happening, if we do end up having a second referendum, can we throw out everything that we've just talked about?
No, not really. Because it's just an extension. There'll be uncertainty while that plays out, which we've already talked about. And then the outcome won't really change much because we've said that growth phase will happen after the uncertainty's gone away. Now, it may start sooner if the second referendum happens and the vote is to stay, but it would have happened anyway. That's the thing. It would have happened. The government will stimulate the market, whatever happens, to encourage growth. And that, with the uncertainty being removed, will really push the markets on, whether that's a year down the line or immediately. But the point is, the final destination, as far as the property market's concerned, will be the same one, which will be a number of years of growth, followed by another bust, because, hey, that's just the market. I want to pick up on something you said, Rob, because I don't want the message to be lost, because I think it's really important. There are three reasons why the property market will either rise or fall. It's the supply of credit, whether in excess or lack of it. It's the market sentiment, whether people are feeling positive or negative about the property market right now. And, of course, supply and demand. Supply and demand being the long-term influence on our cycles, and sentiment and credit being the short-term influence on our cycles. Many people, when asked, what moves the property market, will name one of those. Very few people will name three. But if you understand that there's almost that triangle of things going on, and if you just monitor all three of them, then you've got an idea of what's going to play out in the property market. The long-term supply and demand issue isn't really going to go away. So the long-term property will go up. It's just in the short term, there are more variations because of the other two factors. So, Rob, we know what's happened. We know what's likely to happen. So what should people do?
Well, the main thing to do is to form your own opinion about things. As we've already covered, Don't just look at a headline and let that affect what you do, because chances are the headline is misleading, and even if you read the whole thing, chances are that's only one potential interpretation of a story. Come to your own opinion, and I'd encourage you to do that by looking at the long term, by looking to history, and look at the fundamental drivers of the property market and the world. Those things don't often change, and while whatever is going on a particular day might seem like a really big deal, might make you really angry, might make you upset, chances are in a couple of weeks it's going to be forgotten and we'll be on to the next thing. So come to your own opinion, but our opinion is take advantage of the fact that everyone else is freaking out. This creates opportunities. If there are fewer people in the market because they're waiting to see what happens next, that creates an opportunity right now. If there's someone selling up in a panic and they're willing to take a 15% discount because Mark Carney's told them that it could be worth 30% less in a couple of years, then that creates an opportunity for you as well. There's often opportunity and profit in doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing. So while this uncertainty lasts and everyone else is distracted, stick to your plan, focus on what you can control, and in a few years' time when everyone's forgotten about all of this and moved on to the next panic, I think you'll be very glad that you did.
So we have Property Hub Extra coming up, and you really want to listen to that because what we have for you really links into what we discussed already. But before we get there, I just want to say a huge thanks to the wonderful Hubbers who've left us 5-star reviews. And the first up is Rob H. And Rob H says, "Thanks Rob and Rob for all your hard work and commitment to this fantastic podcast. We, your listeners, should be truly grateful for all the time and effort you put in to share your hard-won property knowledge and wider business acumen. Thanks guys. Since I've started listening to the podcast, I've completed my first buy-to-let investment, a 2-bed flat in Leeds city centre, and I'm looking forward to the next one, which I hope to find shortly. I should say as a pensions actuary that the rant that Rob B goes on about pensions are bang on the money. The majority of the UK public have their head in the sand when it comes to how much they need to save for retirement. And there's a real gap in people's education on this topic. The work that you're doing to help bridge this gap is a real public service, and you should feel really proud of this. I hope to meet you both at a property meetup sometime soon. Until then, keep up the excellent work." Well, thank you, Rob H. And a quick one in from Neil Collis. "Well done, Rob and Rob, and all of your team. You make a great podcast, and it's amazing the level of time and knowledge you share with your community. Keep up the great work, and thank you for helping me learn every week." Well, thank you, you wonderful human beings, for leaving us 5-star reviews. If you'd like to be a wonderful human being, you don't need to give to charity. All you need to do is give us a 5-star review, but you might want to give to charity as well.
Right, time now for Hub Extra, where we try to just squeeze in that little bit more before the end of the show. And we back it up with a Hub Extra email, which will hit your inbox on a Friday if you are a Property Hub member. And if you're not, then go sort that out right now, because it's completely free and it's the most valuable thing that will land in your inbox all week. Sometimes in Hub Extra we share a resource, sometimes it's a tool, sometimes it's a link, but sometimes, like today, it's just an idea. And we've chosen a particular quote today because it ties so perfectly into what we've just been talking about. No, it's not a quote about Brexit. It's much older than that. It's thousands of years old. This is from Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations. And the quote is, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realise this and you will find strength." So Marcus Aurelius is one of the famous Stoic philosophers, and one of the key things, probably the most important thing about Stoicism, is all about separating out what you can control from what you can't, and focusing, of course, on the former. And Rob, this really couldn't be more relevant to what we've just been talking about.
Absolutely. You decide on how you react to events in the world. So, for example, Brexit, I touched on that. I felt quite emotional about this subject. And hand on heart, there's a piece of me that still does. However, that's my choice. I've decided to be emotional. I could decide straight away that actually I'm not going to let this affect me anymore and control any part of my emotions. And that's because I'm in control. It really is that simple. As soon as I choose not to let it bother me anymore, it won't bother me anymore because I've made that choice. Because it's not Brexit that's allowed me to get emotional, it's myself. Many of us will share world events together or share experiences together, but we all act differently towards them. You could actually decide that you want to be positive around a situation. So a real life example is, you see sometimes people running for a tube. They miss it. It's like the end of the world. It's like someone's just told them they're fired, their wife's left them, and their children hate them all at once. But no, they've just missed the tube. And then you may get somebody who's missed the tube and think, actually, I can carry on listening to that podcast because I've still got Wi-Fi before I get on the next one. And hopefully I'll have a better space. Same scenario, 2 different viewpoints. But that's the point. You choose how you decide how you view the world.
Yeah, so important. You can't control what happens in the world, but you can control how you react to it. And you can also control what you listen to, and I hope that you will exercise that choice by joining us for Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday, and then again for the Property Podcast next Thursday. Let us know what you thought about today's episode in the forum at thepropertyhub.net, and let us know on social media what you'd like us to cover in future episodes. We love to hear your ideas, so we can be talking about what matters to you. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Property Hub UK. For now though, that's all we've got time for, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.